Hey, Bill Watson here. Hope you're enjoying these podcasted Bible studies that we've arranged to conduct. You know, the Church of God International has always intended to try to utilize as much of the technology that we have and different methods and tactics that it provides to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And podcasting is really a very valid and legitimate method in utilizing the technologies that are at our disposal. However, podcasting does have its limitations, as you well know. Unlike webcasting, you can't really interact in real time. So what we've done, we've made arrangements whereby you can ask questions or make comments and send them to us via email. That's right, all you've got to do is go ahead and email us at billw@cgi.org, and hopefully this is going to enhance the educational value of the subject that we're covering as we go through the topics in a more specific way, being directed by your questions and your comments. So let's go ahead now, prepare to go back into the book that we're studying, and we'll look forward to your comments and questions. Just email us. Remember, email us at billw@cgi.org. Mentioned, we're going to continue on here in part 7, but we're in actually chapter 6 of the continuing saga of Daniel's life in Babylon, as well as now in Media Persia. And as we begin to pick up this story, I want to just kind of retrack here a little bit into chapter 5, just to make mention of the few statements here that are mentioned with regards to the context of what's going on. Verse 30, we pick up in chapter 5 of Daniel. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, or Babylon there, slain. He was killed that night when the handwriting on the wall appeared. That evening, that very night. And Darius, not Cyrus. You got to keep this distinction in mind. I want you to make note of that. This was not Cyrus the Persian, this was Darius the Mede. So that's important, an important distinction to keep in mind here. It pleased, it says here, Darius the Median took the kingdom being about 62 years old. So I just want to give you some concept here in this history. We're going to go through a lot of history today with regards to context, because I want you to understand that though we are in sequence of the downfall of Babylon, right here this night when the handwriting, remember the hand and it was writing on the wall? Well, this end of chapter 5 now is in time sequence of chapter 6, but if you real quickly go over to chapter 7, we're going to go back to Babylon and under the reign and rule of Belshazzar in Babylon before Babylon fell. So we're being basically what you could say you're seeing a sidebar of time lapse. Okay, so right now we're still in time sequence. We're still in time sequence and we're being brought up to the downfall of Babylon. Darius the Median, 62-year-old emperor, was the one actually that brought Babylon down in about the year 539 or so BC. And so it's Darius here who is actually, get this, the uncle of young 40-year-old Cyrus. Okay? So he was the uncle, the old uncle of young Cyrus, who was 40, the Persian. So you have Cyrus, the Persian, and you have here, as we see, Darius the Mede, and Darius is the uncle of Cyrus, although Cyrus is the big kahuna. Cyrus is the big guy. He's the one that essentially came from the Persians and beat up the Medians to make the Medo-Persian Empire, you see. So Darius was working as a regent, an emperor, a king within the Persian Empire, representing the Median portion of that Persian Empire. So here we see, technically speaking, and it's true historically as well, that Darius, the Median, took the kingdom being about 62 years old. Now this is an exciting backstory. I'm going to take you through some history so that you can get the context, bring yourself forward up so that you can see how Darius became who he was. And then we're going to pick up with chapter 6 here in a moment. But bear with me as we go through this, because I think it's very important that you get this so that you understand some of the history that underscores all of these events. Astyages had a dream. Now, Astyages was the king of the Medians, the Medes. He was the king of the Medes, going back even further. He was actually the father of the daughter who had Cyrus. Okay? In other words, Cyrus was the grandson of Astyages. And so Astyages has a dream. And his daughter, Mandane, his daughter, in the dream had a baby. And in the dream, the baby grew like a vine. I'll bear you the details of some of where that vine came from, but that vine came out and it went and spread all over the world. Well, Astyages, he was the king of the Medes. He got concerned. He didn't like that dream because it appeared that it implied he was going to be removed. So he didn't like it. So his concern was he prearranges this marriage of his daughter, Mandane, Astyages does, king of the Medes. And he prearranges this marriage with a Persian that is named Cambyses, or Cambyses, that's it, Cambyses. And Cambyses, I guess, and Mandane, she got pregnant. And the Magi's of the Medes immediately claimed that that baby, who was Cyrus, by the way, Cyrus, was going to become king. Was going to become king and ultimately usurp Astyages' throne. So he got upset. So he takes things into his own hands and he proceeds to arrange the killing of the baby, his grandson, Cyrus. And consequently, has Harpagus, there'll be a test after all this, by the way. Harpagus, who was one of Astyages' generals in the army, he gives Harpagus the commission to take the baby from Mandane, and put it out in the wilderness and just let the weather take its life and let the animals eat it. And so Harpagus, being the good-hearted general he was, because he respected life as much as he did kill life, didn't like this idea. So on his way to do this, he's looking for a herdsman and puts out the word. He's looking for some Median herdsman that he can pawn this kid off and have them do the dirty work. So he comes up on a guy named Mithridates, who's a herdsman, Mithridates. And Mithridates takes the baby. Harpagus tells him what he wants him to do with the baby, as orders from the king, Astyages. And the herdsman says, no problem. So he takes the baby, and on his way to the wilderness, he stops off at home. This is interesting. This is real history. He stops off on his way home, and his wife, Spako, in Median, her name was Spaka, which means bitch. And there's I'm just laying down some things here. Bear with me. You'll see where I'm going with all this. You'll see where I'm going with all this. We're not on the internet, by the way. So with that being said, Spaka was having her baby and gave birth to a stillborn. Well, you guessed it. They switched the babies. And they took the stillborn of Spaka. And went ahead and buried it in place of Cyrus. And Spaka raised Cyrus up, making, obviously, Syra a son of a bitch. I'm not kidding. This is history. This is history. And Cyrus was. He was one big dude to handle, I'll tell you. But at any rate, history, according to the history of Persia, when Cyrus was 10 years old, Astyages went ahead and discovered that Cyrus was alive. And interestingly enough, Harpagus, the Medes get into a war with the Persians. Cyrus now is of age. Cyrus is now of age. Years have passed. And Astyages understands that Cyrus is alive. So interestingly enough, he takes Astyages does, his general, Harpagus, and tells him to take an army and go beat up the Persians, Cyrus. Well, what happens is the Persians beat up the Medes. And Cyrus is victorious over his grandfather, Astyages. And Astyages loses that battle, and, believe it or not, Cyrus takes care of Astyages until he dies. Takes care of him well, in spite of the betrayal and all of that. Took care of him, and Astyages died a good old death under the care of his grandson, Cyrus, interestingly enough. I found that story rather amazing. And so now Darius, who is actually Astyages' son. Darius was Astyages' son. So you have Darius, the son of Astyages, the uncle of Cyrus. And Darius, who was born before Cyrus, of course, went ahead and became here in chapter 6 the guy that was delegated. So Cyrus, nephew, delegated to his uncle, Darius, to take down Babylon. And Darius went out and took down Babylon that night when the hand appeared on the wall. And so the story goes, interesting backdrop. And so now Darius, we find, of course, in the graces of Cyrus, as a general, proceeds to take on the responsibility of restructuring the Babylonian kingdom. And we pick up the story here in verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, verse 1 now, chapter 6, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these three presidents, of whom Daniel was the first. So Daniel's reputation apparently preceded him, because Darius adopted him basically and allowed him to become the what would be considered top dog of the three presidents that were picked to run the region of what formerly was Babylon. And so as a result, he goes here and he says that princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then Daniel was preferred above the presidents, and this is where Daniel begins to go heads and shoulders above the rest of them, and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So Daniel now becomes the super coordinator of the sub-realms, and essentially these guys answer to him. Needless to say, that didn't sit too well, knowing that Daniel was originally a Jewish POW. He was a Jewish captive. He was a Jewish person, and these guys, being Medians and Persians, didn't like the idea that, of course, a Jew would be put in place or over them. So the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel. They were jealous. They were driven by envy. They wanted to take him out so that they could get rid of him. And consequently, they go ahead and could not, though, find none occasion nor fault. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So basically, they're looking to conspire. And so they're contriving this idea of, well, how can we get him? We can't get him on anything that he's doing, because everything that he's doing doesn't seem to be against the law. There's no charge that we can really bring forth. So let's conjure up something that would cause him to violate his faith, because we know he's a religious guy. And so as a result, maybe we can somehow get him to transgress that and then be able to bring forth a charge that could be of some substance and get him on those. So in verse 6, or verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So in verse 6 then, they said this, then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. all the presidents, so they're all in conspiracy with this. They're all conspiring. They're all on the same page. They're all basically culpable in this little event that they conjure up. And they said here, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, except of you, O king, he shall be cast into a den of lions. Now, I don't know how far the conspiracy was known into those other levels of counselors and captains and so forth, and princes, but the fact of it is that there was a conspiracy here at work that conjured up this idea of getting King Darius to drop this decree that would force the inhabitants of former Babylon to basically pay homage to the king. Now, O king, establish a decree, verse 8. Sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which alters not. Wherefore, King Darius signed the writing and the decree. So basically, he liked the idea. He succumbed to it. He found it acceptable and decided, well, you know what, this sounds like a good idea. I don't mind people worshiping me. So he went ahead, signed it into law for 30 days, that anybody found going ahead and worshiping another god besides him, basically, or bowing down to something other than him, would get them in trouble. So verse 10, and this is interesting. Notice Daniel's behavior, because this is a little nuance of what happened to Daniel during that transition time of when the Medes and Persians took over Babylon, and then Daniel was awarded the role that he was in and what he had to contend with for a duration of time with these individuals. And gives us a little bit of a keyhole look into Daniel's life post-Babylon, current Medes and Persians. Because remember, Daniel lived between two kingdoms, two empires. He lived in the transition from Babylon, the head of gold, remember that vision that Nebuchadnezzar had? The head of gold, to the breastplate, of, what was it, brass, I think it was, which was the Medes and the Persians that came next. Furthermore, you're going to see, and this is where Daniel 7 comes into play. We're not there yet, but just to give you a little bit of a heads up, remember, Daniel 7, the time sequence of Daniel 7 was before chapter 6. Before chapter 6, as far as time sequence is concerned. Because remember, we can see that by chapter 7 saying we're in the first year of Belshazzar. Well, Belshazzar in chapter 6 is dead. He's dead. So what do we got going here? We got a sidebar. We've got, you ever watch a movie and they take you up to a certain point, then they stop, and then they bring you back some backstory to bring you back up to speed. And the book of Revelation is built that way in many respects. The book of Revelation is built where you've got what we used to call inset chapters. Well, you could say chapter 6 is an inset chapter for all intents and purposes in this case. But at any rate, verse 10, chapter 6, book of Daniel, we go on. Now, when Daniel heard or knew of the writing, the law that was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem. It's almost like he's doing this on purpose. It's almost like, what? Opens up the doors and the windows, kneels down, so everybody's uncle and brother, Tom, Dick, and Harry can see him. And you're wondering, what? What's going on here? Why is he so emboldened to act this way? Well, there's an interesting consideration to keep in mind here, and I'll show you that in a minute. But let me finish verse 10. So he says here, to chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneels down on his knees 3 times. So if you don't catch me in the morning, maybe you can catch me in the afternoon. If you don't catch me in the afternoon, maybe you can catch me in the evening. Oh, you didn't catch me today? Well, I'll do it again tomorrow. And he does this 3 times a day. And prayed, gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Well, these men assembled, and of course, found Daniel praying, making supplication before his God. Now, you get to thinking, why would Daniel, okay, it's only 30 days. Come on, it's only 30 days. Pick your battles. Why make a display of something that, you could do in private and perhaps nobody will ever catch you? Why would you be so outgoing and so vivacious about it and so public about it in this case? And I got to thinking about that, but here's something we got to keep in consideration. Over here in chapter 9, I want to bring your attention to, again, post-Babylon destruction. We're during the time of Darius, okay? Babylon is destroyed. Babylon is gone. Darius has moved in, just like chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom. That's verse 1. But now look, chapter 9. In the first year of Darius, okay. So here we are again. Darius. We're back in the first year of the transition between Babylon to Persia, okay? And it's here in that first year that, look at this, verse 2, the first year of his reign, Daniel understood by books the number of years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, and that is in reference to the 70 years that Jeremiah had mentioned in his writings. It says here, Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. And I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplication with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed unto the Lord my God, and made my confession and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him, and to them that keep his commandments, we have sinned and have committed iniquity and have done wickedly and have rebelled, even by departing from the precepts and from the judgments. Neither have we hearkened unto the servants of the prophets which spoke in thy name, to our gods and our princes and our fathers and all the people of the land. I'm not going to go down through all of this, but here's my point. Daniel, in the first year of Darius's reign, already knew the jig would be up in 70 years and the Jews would be released. And he knew Cyrus was the man. And he knew Cyrus was alive. Wow! Can you imagine the self-eureka actualizing realization of the fact that God's involved in what's going on here? This is major. This is going to result in the freeing of our people. And so Daniel was emboldened. Daniel had a lot behind him that he knew that there was providential workings going on with this transition and the downfall of Babylon and the involvement of the Persians and Cyrus in particular, because I submit to you, I don't know, I can't prove it, but I submit to you, if he had the writings of Jeremiah, Daniel, why wouldn't he have the writings of Isaiah? And if he had the writings of Isaiah, he had the name Cyrus, because Isaiah prophesied Cyrus would be the liberator of God's people. That Cyrus was not only considered a liberator, he was considered his anointed, God's anointed. That's what he calls him, Cyrus. Isaiah called him, Cyrus, God's anointed. So assuming, I'm just saying, it could very possibly be, it's plausible. I mean, if he had Jeremiah's writings, he could have Isaiah's writings, so he would have known both not only the 70 years limitation, then the Jews would be released to go back to the homeland, because those are the prophecies, but secondly, that Cyrus would be the liberator. Now, if that be the case, obviously the only thing that would be disconcerting about all of this, and somewhat inquisitive, would be, when did the years begin? When did they begin? When did the count begin? Because that would determine how long it would be before the 70 years were up. Did Daniel know that? I don't know that. It's hard to say, and frankly, it's hard to say even if Daniel was alive before or alive while the Jews were indeed released, if he actually saw that. It's really speculation in that respect, as far as I know, as to whether or not we could prove Daniel was alive. We'll get into a little bit of that because there is some speculation surrounding that later on. But at any rate, back to verse 10 here in chapter 6. So we see that Daniel is somewhat aware of the fact there's a providential event underway. There's a providential event underway. Was that contributory to his emboldenment described in verse 10, doing what he did? Perhaps. But certainly it would give him a level of confidence, knowing full well that he was in the throes of providence, so to speak. So here in verse 12 now, we continue. Then they came near and spoke before the king concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, except for you, O king, shall he be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and he said, yeah, the thing's true, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which alters not. Yes, these guys came to him and they put the king on line, on record, and the king admitted, he verbally not condoned, but validated the fact of what he wrote and the penalty that was associated with the decree. And so then they said, verse 13, well, they answered, and they said before the king that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah. See, they knew he was a Jew. They knew very well. They could not stand the fact that he was their boss for all intents and purposes. Regards not you, O king, nor the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So they've been watching him. They knew how many times a day he was doing it, and they knew that he was doing it daily. So they were well aware. They were watching him. They were basically stalking him to catch him and be able to use this as the charge that they were opining about, not having over there in verse 5 with regards to finding some kind of a charge that they could bring forth to convict him on so that Darius and or Cyrus would throw him into these, or not Cyrus so much, but Darius, and throw him into this lion's den. So it goes on here, verse 13, then answered they about Daniel, and verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was sore. Now this is interesting, this is different. He was displeased with himself. Now I want you to contrast that in your mind. Contrast that in your mind with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Nebuchadnezzar. When they went against Nebuchadnezzar and were thrown into the fire, remember the furnace? They were thrown into the fire. Nebuchadnezzar, if you recall, was outraged at them. There was no self-reflection with Nebuchadnezzar. That was his problem. He was a narcissist, and he was egotistical. He was autocratic. He was a dictator. He was a tyrant of sorts. And so it wasn't his fault that Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego did what they did. They should have known better. And so he was outraged at them. But the contrast here is interesting because remember, Darius, back here in verse 1, identified Daniel and awarded him the role that he awarded him as a president, and then later on promoted him to become president of all presidents. So Darius was in Daniel's court. He was in Daniel's corner. He liked Daniel. And so for all intents and purposes, when he understood what happened, now he's in a corner. Because the king don't lie. The king don't lie. He's got no option here because it is true. These presidents brought forth charges that have been validated by eyewitnesses that Daniel 3 times a day for who knows how many days during this 30-day period had been basically violating the king's decree. So the king, when he heard these things, verse 14 again, was sore displeased with himself that he got hoodwinked, and set in his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver. So he delayed. He did not want to do this. He did not want. He was really bothered by this. His conscience was bothering him to the point where he just kept delaying and delaying all day for the remainder of the day. Maybe these guys came in the morning and the whole day until the going down of the sun. Verse 15 now. These men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and the Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establishes may be changed. So you're stuck. We brought charges. We want this guy thrown into the lion's den. You got to throw him in. You got to kill him. You got to send him in. You wrote the decree. You can't back down. You are responsible to follow through according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians. Verse 16. Then the king commanded, notice this is interesting. The king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now, the king spoke and said unto Daniel, so before they did that, the king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, and I don't know if this was a question or if it is really indeed a statement. I don't know. It's written as a statement in the King James, but nevertheless, it appears as though one way or the other, certainly the king, Darius, seems to indicate to Daniel either the assurance that his God will indeed protect him, or he's asking Daniel, won't your God protect you? One of the two. But at any rate, he says here, now the king spoke and he said unto Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. And it comes across as Darius actually being confident and reassuring Daniel, your God's he's going to protect you. Don't worry about it, Daniel. Don't worry about it. I don't know if we can go that far, but it appears as though that's the way it's written here. Verse 17, and a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. And then the king went to his palace, passed the night fasting. He was really bothered by this. Darius did not want to do this. He was really totally 110% against doing this to Daniel, and he knew that he had no choice but was tricked into doing this by these guys, these presidents, these leaders of the community, and frankly was ticked. He was mad. He was so sad and mad with regards for doing what he had to do to Daniel, and he fasted. Neither were instruments of music. Apparently, he would have entertainment before he would go to bed sometimes at night. He didn't want anything before him, and he was up all night. He was really bothered. Sleep was away from him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep. He's fasting, didn't want no music, he didn't want to celebrate, and he couldn't sleep. He was up all night obsessing and being bothered by what he had done. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went, and the Hebrew here means terrified. He was terrified. He hastily went, but he was terrified. He was terrified, hoping that the lions obviously didn't kill him, unto the den of lions. The word haste can be, as I say, translated into the Hebrew, terrified. When he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice. He was afflicted. He was upset. That's what this means. He was actually just really upset emotionally over this, and lamentably was crying out for Daniel, hoping to hear his voice. He was so saddened at what he had done. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God whom you serve continually able to deliver you from the lions? And this is why I go back to verse 16. Because there seems to be, if indeed he was so sure in 16, why was he so doubtful here or questionable in verse 20? You see how it can be somewhat, there's a contrasting here, to where on one end he seems to be encouraging based on the fact that it's a statement in verse 16, Daniel, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you, versus this questioning and a lamentable attitude that he has, running to the lion's den with no sleep the night before, empty stomach because he fasted all night, no entertainment, running because all he was obsessed all night about Daniel and in the grips of those lions, running to the den where the rock was, saying, Daniel, Daniel, So he was really emotional and screaming out for Daniel, questioning, of course here written as a question, Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God, whom you serve continually, almost the same words as verse 16, able to deliver you from the lions? I love this. Verse 21, then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. This is dynamite. This is so encouraging when you get into this story. And listen to what Daniel says happened that night. He says, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths that they could not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before you, O king, have I done no hurt. Can you imagine that? All night long, there's Daniel sitting in the lion's den with an angel. He's sitting there with an angel. I don't know if they talked. I don't know if they, kind of, keep him down, keep doing a good job there, whoever it was, Gabriel, or whatever it was. But the point of it is, there's this angel sitting there with Daniel in the lion's den, and the lions just looking. I mean, I don't know if the lions could see the angel, but I'm sure the lions were somewhat, like the deer in the headlights. Why wouldn't they just go and kill Daniel? What was stopping them? There had to be something, that just caused those lions to be very docile. And uniquely enough, they did not hurt Daniel, and the king was exceedingly glad, verse 23, for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed. See, no doubt. No doubt. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they said to Nebuchadnezzar, look, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't know if our God's going to protect us. Now, on their terms, we want protection. My terms would be, that furnace is pretty hot. Yeah, we want protection. But they said to Nebuchadnezzar, you know what? We don't know if our God's going to protect us. But we do know this. We're not going to bow down to you. So do what you will. We'll leave it in God's hands. Meaning, they were conceded. They were surrendered to the fact that they might be burned up. And that would be the end of them. And uniquely enough, we know the rest of the story that it didn't happen that way. And here, Daniel, we're told, again, believed in his God. Because he believed in his God, he was not at all in any way, shape, or form hurt. And I don't know, maybe I overthink things, but I wonder, when Daniel was first introduced into the den, and the lions were there, and they looked at him, maybe the angel had not yet arrived, and maybe growled a few times, and God's watching Daniel, looking for some reaction, see what Daniel's going to do, to make sure, see where his faith is, the level, the degree. I don't know. I don't know how God was testing Daniel at this point, but it says, because he believed in his God. So whatever Daniel did when he was first introduced to that den of lions, and those lions, I don't know how many were there, 3, 4, half a dozen, I don't know, and they all looked at him. They all looked at him, looked him up and down, maybe licked their chops a little bit, drool coming out of their mouths, I don't know. But I'm sure it was rather disturbing for Daniel to see that and come face to face with no barrier between him and these lions. And then all of a sudden, this angel comes in and says, sit down, I got this. Boys, sit. And that was the rest for the whole night. Amazing, just amazing story here. And so he believed God. God was satisfied that there was no doubt, and it goes back to the sermon that we heard earlier, no doubt, and he was satisfied, and therefore the protection, and I'm sure it was on Daniel's terms too, came, and he was saved from being eaten alive by those lions. Verse 24 now. The king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel. Oh my, Darius, I'm sure he was chomping at the bit to get these guys, because they put him, King Darius, through a meat grinder of emotion that evening, going through what he was going through and all that, and being the kind of human nature these kings of these Gentile nations were, he was just, I'm sure, just sweating up. He couldn't get to these guys fast enough, if you know what I'm saying. And so he brings those guys, verse 24, which accused Daniel, and cast them into the den of lions, and their children, and their wives. This guy was brutal. And the lions had the mastery, that's being polite, and broke all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Bloody mess. I don't know how many people were in there and how many lions, but it was a feast for those lions, needless to say, on all those people. Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, and this is the end of the story here. This is the whole point of this event and what you could say record of this event, because this was a major change in the political social system of this area of former Babylon, and of which contributed to the environment that allowed Cyrus to ultimately free the Jews. And it seemed good to do, even though the Jews at one time were viewed as enemies of Babylon via the Medes and the Persians, and were still considered what you could say booty from a war. The fact of it was the environment within the Median Persian Empire afforded a culture, a motif, an ambience that allowed Cyrus, this brutal emperor, to allow, under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, and of course, I don't know if Daniel saw it or not, but Jeremiah as well, who were all at this point still, I don't know if Jeremiah was still alive, but certainly along in these areas overlapped to a certain degree. But at any rate, 25, Darius writes unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. And this is an amazing realization. No longer are the Medes and Persians putting their gods before the very God of Daniel. This is awesome. This is a major move. And like I said, I'm sure heavily contributed to the environment that afforded Cyrus, without much resistance from his generals and or from the people of Persia, to release the Jews back to their homeland to rebuild the temple, which is all what here is beginning to develop, and is what happened and how Ezra and Nehemiah play into this later on. So he says here, for he is the living God, the steadfast ever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. That's great respect from a Gentile emperor named Darius here. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. End of this little nuance of event in Daniel's life post-Babylonian downfall, hence present Median and Persian Empire. Now, again, let me remind you, chapter 7, we go back. So we stop here up to this point. We've taken it all the way through the downfall of Babylon, and I don't know to how far into the Babylonian takeover or occupation of the Medes and the Persians. But we do know that it probably was at least a year or two or three, perhaps. We're not quite sure when all this lion den stuff happened. But we do know that Daniel, in the first year of Darius, read the books of Jeremiah and knew it would be 70 years. And he knew that he was in captivity, at least from the time he arrived. Remember, Babylonians invaded Judah, 3 major invasions. Daniel was probably taken with his buddies, the first invasion. Ezekiel was taken in the second invasion. He, Ezekiel, ended up on the river Kibar, in parallel, contemporary to the boys Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel in Nebuchadnezzar's king court. And then you had the third guy who was alive. All 3 of them were alive. All 3 of them were contemporary. God does not work through one man at a time. God works his plan contemporaneously with as many people as what he determines it takes. And in this case, at this time in history, you had Daniel in the king's court up there in Nebuchadnezzar in the heart of Babylon. You had Ezekiel down by the river Kibar, who was also receiving visions as well as Daniel was. And you had also Jeremiah in Judah, up to his neck in defecation. Remember, they put him in there, and that's where they found him. The Babylonians found him there. and he was in the front lines. And he was a prophet as well, receiving visions and prophecies in addition, in parallel, contemporary. Those three guys alive all at the same time, each having, if I could use this terminology, their own ministry. Their own ministry. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to a lesser degree, but nevertheless they had parts and roles to play in. So we then end in chapter 6. Chapter 7, we go back into Babylon. So we take the storyline up, stop, now we go back and get some backstory. And here we find that Daniel receives a vision, not Nebuchadnezzar. Remember the statue in chapter 2? That was Nebuchadnezzar's vision. This is Daniel's vision. So this is an important distinction also. The head of gold, that was Nebuchadnezzar's vision. God visited Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had that vision. Daniel was brought in to interpret that dream, remember? This does not go to the king of Belshazzar of Babylon. This goes to Daniel the prophet. And so now you've got confirmation, and this is important to understand in prophecy. And we're going to spend some time in chapter 7. I don't know if we'll finish it all in one shot, because it's quite a chapter to take in, because it lays down now some groundwork. Chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9 are tethered together to a certain degree, where they all play off of one another in the timeline of the downfall of Babylon and the occupation of Persia, Media, into the Babylonian area. Chapters 10, 11, and 12 are all tethered together, combined together. They make up what some have said the longest prophecy in your Bible. I take contention with that. I believe the longest prophecy in your Bible is the book of Revelation. But that's another story. The point is, though, it was a singular vision that was brought to Daniel, chapter 10, by an angel who had a hard time getting through Persia. He had to fight demons along the way in the backdrop, in the invisible world. We'll get into that. And then chapter 11, we have a whole historical playing out, a whole historical saga, a whole historical epic of what went on from Alexander the Great and the Greco-Macedonian Empire in the early verses of chapter 11. Through chapter 11 to the second coming and the first resurrection of Christ in chapter 12, verses 1 through about 4. It's an amazing prophecy. And then we have some additional post-amble, not preamble, but post-amble discussion in chapter 12 that carries us to an end-time line defining some things in the end times that we can look at, and of which we'll get into regarding some of the controversy associated with how certain people interpret those particular times and dates, and hopefully be able to ferret some clarity out of all of them. But chapter 7 is going to be quite a chapter to undertake, but it's important that at the outset we understand this vision, chapter 7, went to Daniel direct, and it validates the overlap of the dream Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. And by two witnesses, a truth is validated. And consequently, you've got Daniel, and of all things, Nebuchadnezzar, validating this prophetic saga that is going to undertake empires and kingdoms down through until Jesus returns and God sets up his kingdom on earth.